We're not going to use the citizens of Texas taxpayer dollars to do the dirty work of the federal government that they have no business doing. We're only going to use the TCEQ to implement, affect, and regulate Texas state law. When you get the EPA off of agriculture, get it out of energy, get it off of manufacturing, that begins to free up the economy in the state of Texas. The surest thing and the first thing that we must do on the issue of securing freedom, because I think I talked about private property ownership and gun ownership and skipped right over the getting rid of property tax. I kind of got that checked off already, like done. The reality is we need a piece of legislation to get that done. It is a fairly simple piece of legislation to get rid of property taxes. Texas legislature has created all of these entities that levy a property tax piecemeal because we decided we needed a new hospital district over there in Montgomery County, and we gave them the authority to form a hospital district, and we gave the hospital district the authority to tax. And we formed a water district over here, and we got a new city over there. And so we've got all of these piecemeal places. We believe the clearest way, the cleanest way, is to have one bill that says basically to any and all entities that have the authority today to levy a property tax, that authority is hereby rescinded. You no longer have the authority to levy property tax. It is a relatively seamless transition to move from funding schools with a property tax to funding them with a sales tax. You may think that your schools are funded with a local property tax, but in fact the appropriation, who gets how much, is decided by two guys in Austin. I had someone tell me in Austin only two people understand how that happens. And those two guys shuffle that money around. So whether that money comes in the form of a sales tax or property tax is fairly immaterial. The devil is in the detail, figuring out how to allow Kingwood to raise what it needs, and the Woodlands to raise what it needs, and Montgomery County to raise what it needs, and Harris County to raise what it needs. That conversation needs to start in earnest on March 3rd when we know who our nominees are going to be for the State House and the State Senate. You get on the horn and you call those people and y'all start having that conversation. That legislation needs to be drafted. We need to be debating it as Texans. We need to get it hammered out so that it's ready to go in January 2011. We get rid of property tax and we create the authority for local entities. I'm not advocating, no one on our economic team is advocating a statewide sales tax that Austin decides who gets what. You keep revenue at the source where the service is delivered. You keep it tight, you keep it accountable, you keep it local. If we think local government is best, I got a question for you. How come 6 cents of your sales tax goes to Austin and 2 stays in your community? Are there things, we're going to have to cut spending in Texas. We've been under the misconception, intentionally so, subversion, diversion, some might call it lie, by our state government that we have a balanced budget here. What we have in Texas is a state government that spends every penny that it makes, that it takes, spends every penny that it takes, and has tripled our debt. When Governor Perry took office, the state of Texas had $12 billion worth of debt. Today we have $31 billion worth of debt. If we do not take on another dime of debt, you know, when you have a house payment, you have an amortization schedule. It tells you how long before you're going to pay that off. If we don't take on another dime of debt, the state of Texas gets out of debt in 2047. We've tripled our debt. We've become more dependent on Washington, D.C. Governor Perry's up there asking for that bailout. Do not be deceived. He is a big government, more and more government candidate. He sings a great conservative song. I bought it myself a couple times and cast votes that way, but I won't do that anymore. We have an opportunity to restore freedom and prosperity, get rid of property tax in Texas, but we're going to have to cut spending. And I'm beginning to look at what's going on in Austin that maybe ought to be more appropriately done at the local level. And as soon as you say that, your city councilman and your county commissioners go say the last thing we need is more mandates from Austin. You know, one-size-fits-all government doesn't work very well when it comes from Washington, D.C. Is that the right direction? Keep pointing over. And it doesn't work very well when it comes from Austin out to Texas either. This is a big state. We've got to be courageous enough to let Harris County be a little bit different from Montgomery County, be a little bit different from El Paso and Nueces and Hidalgo and Beaumont, and say keep it local. So as we look at things that would better be done at the local level than mandated out of Austin, we ought to also look at, is that the proper relationship? Because it seems to me it ought to be 6 and 2 and not 2 and 6. We don't get back there overnight either. But when we're talking about things that the state of Texas ought to be doing, don't think that we're the same, Kay Perry and Rick Hutchison and I. See, they're going to be, some of you got that. They're going to be big spenders. When they talk about doing these things, they're going to talk about taking more of your money. I'm talking about putting your money back down here in the local level, shifting that balance so that you've got the resources that you need and giving you a truly limited state government. Which might bring up the question of transportation. Anybody here concerned about transportation in Texas? Oh, yeah. We've been talking a lot about the TTC, and I've been asking a lot of questions about what's going on in transportation. I think most of us are uncomfortable with a lot that's going on in our government. We have this sense that we're not being given the whole story. In my little rural county, we had three TxDOT hearings with our money, purportedly so they could understand. They're either really slow, really dense. I don't know why they needed 3, because Lord knows every one of those hearings, those public hearings, were full of Texans saying, bad idea. We don't want to give our state to a foreign company. Not too hard for most of us to get, but they got really thick skulls at TxDOT, and they just couldn't get it. And it's died 5 times, so we've been told. But just last week, there was an employee of TxDOT testifying in the Texas House that it's still alive and well and those contracts are still in place. Just a few months ago, the senator released her transportation plan, and she has in there a multimodal network, transportation network. Call it multimodal transportation network, call it TTC. The plan is the same thing. Kay Perry and Rick Hutchison are going to shove the NAFTA super quarter down the throat of Texans unless we change our course. When we talk about funding transportation, she will pat herself on the back that we're getting 92 cents of our dollar, of our fuel tax dollar, coming back to Texas. Texas is a donor state. We get 92 cents back, and the governor will say, but only 72 cents is spent on roads because the feds mandate that we use the other 22 cents for transit, high-speed rail, and bus services. And I said to the Dallas Morning News Editorial Review Board that I didn't believe that ought to be Washington's decision, and I thought most Texans wouldn't want those 22 cents spent on transit. We ought to spend them on roads. And the Dallas folks said, well, what about buses? And I said, no room for buses in Texas state tax dollars. You want a bus in Kingwood, then you get a bus in Kingwood. Better yet, let some private entrepreneur run a bus service in Kingwood, not